Story 1. I was babysitting, and the little girl whispered, "Don't go in the bathroom. She doesn't like you. There was nobody else home." Story 2. The neighbor's child who loved to torment animals was singing, "Turtle, turtle, whack, 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 hit its shell until it cracks," to the tune of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," while trying to smash a live baby turtle he found in his yard. Our family and the other neighbors complained to his parents, but they just laughed it off as kids being kids. As if stomping baby birds, kicking cats, and cutting the limbs off a frog was in any way normal and appropriate behavior for a child. Story 3. When my daughter was about 3, she told me she missed her old life when she lived in the trees. I asked her what she meant, and she said, "Before you were my mummy, I was an owl and lived in the trees. I love you, but I miss my owl mummy." And less creepy but just funny. This morning when I was still asleep, my 6-year-old came into our room and whispered into my ear, "I know how to grow potatoes." I have no idea what put the thought into his head or why he felt the need to tell me at 6 a.m. Story 4. Not necessarily creepy, but it left me feeling strange. My daughter was about 3 years old, going on 4 at the time, and we were having a moment alone in my bed, just relaxing together as I combed my fingers through her hair. She looked at me and said, "I'm glad I picked you from the mom box." I asked, "What do you mean, mom box?" She replied, "I picked you out of a long row of mom boxes. I almost picked another mom. She had yellow hair, but I picked you because you looked so nice. And then I was born, and you were my mom." She said it very matter-of-factly, and it gave me goosebumps in the moment. Could definitely be attributed to a child's imagination, but I've never forgotten it. She's 10 now and has no recollection of it. Story 5. Pointing at the empty corridor, I cried and said, "Why won't he leave me alone?" I told him I don't want to play anymore. Story 6. My little cousin grabbed my hand at a family dinner, pointed to an empty corner, and said, "That's where the burning lady stands at night." I found out later that there had been a kitchen fire in that exact spot decades ago, where someone was badly hurt. Story 7. "There is a girl with black eyes in your closet," said my 7-year-old niece as she happily strummed my guitar with a colored pencil. Story 8. I was in a public bathroom stall when a child, probably around 8 years old, started singing in front of my stall. "I can see you from behind. You can hear me in your mind. Run as fast as you can go. Time will catch you before you know." I came out of the stall and told her that her hair was really pretty. She replied creepily, "Thank you, I like yours too," and ran out giggling. Story 9. I was putting my girlfriend's son to bed when he wanted a hug. I hugged him, and while we embraced, he looked over my shoulder and waved something away, saying, "No, not now, go away." It was quite unsettling. Story 10. When my son was a toddler, he talked about the melting man and the 2 skeletons standing in his room. He thought the melting man was funny, and he always walked around to where each of the 3 stood. He did this for months until one night at around 2 a.m. he woke up screaming while staring at the ceiling. His head and eyes darted around as he watched the melting man move up there. We went to the living room, and he was fine for a moment until the melting man came onto the ceiling from out of the hallway. I couldn't calm him, so we went to a 24-hour Walmart for 3 hours. He was absolutely fine while out of the house, but it started right back up when we got home. That became the first time we fully cleansed the house. You can dismiss it as much as you'd like, but it stopped. He never spoke about the melting man or the skeletons again, and that was 6 years ago now. We never brought it up again either, as we never knew if it would cause issues again if we mentioned it. In the past few weeks, he's been complaining about nightmares of a cow with its face melting off. He refuses to tell me anything more about it though. Here's to hoping it isn't a repeat of back then. Story 11. Not said to me but by me. When I was about 3 to 5 years old, I apparently described in great detail life as both a lighthouse keeper and a Victorian prostitute until it went dark. 2 separate incidents both freaked my mother out to no end. Story 12. Oh, apparently when I was 2, I told my mom, "I'm glad we're moving. I don't like the old lady who sits on my bed." Story 13. When I was younger, around 5 to 7 years old, I knew that my great-grandma had died before anyone else did. I drew a picture of her with X's for eyes and told my mom and dad that she had passed away. No one believed me until they dropped me off at school and received the call. Still freaks my family out. Story 14. You look just like my grandma, but you're not her. You look younger, though. I just smiled, but inside I was unsure if I was being complimented or cursed. Story 15. My nephew and I were walking down a road when I told him to take my hand. He said, I want to walk on the side away from the road because when I was an old man, I was hit by a car. Story 16. Well, it is not something they said because the baby was too small to speak, but one of my relatives knew a person who owed them a lot and that person died. Somehow, his huge house came into the possession of my relative. I went over once for tea, and I was shocked. The house was enormous. It had 3 to 4 bedrooms, a large gallery with the rooms, an enormous living room, a terrace, and a swimming pool. It was actually beautiful. They had a baby not long ago, and while we were talking in the living room, the baby started looking at the top corner and giggling. I thought it was cute that she could do that already, but the mom immediately freaked out. She jumped to the baby and turned her around to face the other direction. To my shock, the baby turned back as much as she could with her head and continued to giggle and smile in the same direction. For your information, that corner was empty. It was the only corner with no gallery, just plain white wall. I asked what was going on because the baby was really acting strange. They explained how they got the house and that the old owner had hanged himself there. It didn't take more than a year for them to decide to move out. Story 17. When my daughter was about 3, she told us she didn't want to sleep in her room anymore. She said there was a little boy who stood in the corner of her room looking at her sometimes. She described him quite well. Small, white, messy blonde hair, wearing a red jumper and white socks with no trousers. Years later, we realized the local school uniform had a bright red jumper. A few years after that, I was talking to my elderly neighbor, who had lived in her house opposite mine since 1973. I told her that funny story about the little boy. She frowned and asked, "Are you talking about Alan?" Apparently, there was a little blonde boy who lived in our house in the 1980s in my daughter's room. He's still alive. He's a little older than me, and I would love to track him down and ask if, when he was little, he saw a little girl on his bed. Story 18. I was home alone when she pointed out that a man kept following me around. I have never felt more like I was walking with my back to the wall in my life. Story 19. My sister used to talk to the old lady in the rocking chair in her bedroom. She still remembers her. I babysat often and would hear the chair moving when she was fast asleep. My daughter used to say, "Before, when I was a mommy and I had 3 little girls." Nothing really creepy, but some details aligned with my grandmother's life. She passed away 18 months before my daughter was born. Story 20. It wasn't exactly creepy to me, but my daughter told me matter-of-factly at around 2 to 3 years old that she used to have a mom named Lisa last time she was alive. She said they lived in a greenhouse, her other mom was very nice, gave lots of hugs, and had 5 other children. But then Lisa died, so she came back, and I became her mom. She told me Lisa had both red hair and red eyes. She emphasized the eye color. We had never talked with her about past lives or death, so it was curious. I was pregnant with my son at the time, and she also insisted and told everyone that her brother's name was Arkano the person, because she used to have a farm dog named Arkano during a different time she was alive. When I say she told everyone, I mean strangers in grocery stores, her preschool teachers, her doctor. We got a lot of perplexed looks. One of my favorites was when she was around 6 years old in the dead of winter and was hanging upside down from a climber we had set up in the living room. She was quiet and just hanging by her knees when she suddenly said, "Mom, what if this is all God's dream?" Story 21. A kid looked me in the eyes and asked, "Do you ever dream you are not in your body anymore?" Then they just went back to coloring. Story 22. My almost 2-year-old would wake up screaming and say, "Man in ceiling," when I asked what was wrong. At the time, her bedroom door had glass panels she could see through, directly to the hallway where the attic door was. A few days earlier, I had woken up to find the attic door slightly open. It was far too heavy for any of us to lift, and we couldn't reach it as we didn't have a ladder. We moved out soon after, just in case it was a real man in the ceiling and not a ghost. Story 23. When my roommate's daughter was a toddler, she told me not to look for her dad because he was sleeping. It turned out she had locked the door while he was outside. Story 24. They keep telling me to kill mama, said a 5-year-old patient in an inpatient psychiatric hospital when we asked why he couldn't fall asleep. Story 25. After dark at an event in a large park, I took my toddler daughter to the car to change her in the back seat, as there was nowhere else to do it nearby. Plus, I had left her change bag in the car. With the car door open, I leaned into the car to sort my daughter out in the dark. "Daddy," she said, looking over my shoulder. "Yes, honey? That man is coming to get you." I spun around quickly, accidentally smashing my face into the door and the back of my head against the upper door frame. But there was no one there. I could hear footsteps some distance away. The rest of the procedure went quickly, and I grabbed my daughter and speed walked back to my wife. Story 26. I was a nanny for a couple of years for a child who was autistic and would often repeat words from television shows, movies, advertisements, and songs to express himself. One day, I turned around to see him covered in blood. It was all over his face, shirt, hands, and arms. My heart stopped, but I just thought, don't freak out. If you freak out, he'll freak out. So I said, "Hey buddy, where did that blood come from? Are you hurt?" His response, through gritted teeth, his usual scripting tone, was, "I will kill you." It turned out he had been picking his nose and jabbed himself hard with a fingernail. The statement was likely a response to seeing the blood and making a connection to a movie he had seen. But still, Story 27. We were in my 3-year-old daughter's room when she looked up at the window in the top corner, the only one not covered with blinds. She got scared and ran away while giggling in fright. We asked her if she saw something, and she said yes. We inquired if she could still see it, and she responded yes. We asked her what she saw. "It's us. I can see us." There's no way she was seeing a reflection or anything. It was really creepy. Story 28. My cousin had an imaginary friend when he was little. This friend was an old man who played with him when he was lonely and was always kind based on my cousin's experiences. We believe this old man died in the house before my cousin lived there. It was both eerie and comforting because he would stop my cousin from crying at night and do little things to ease the burden on a single mother with a baby. Story 29. My 4-year-old once looked me in the eyes and said, "Don't worry. The man in the closet told me he won't hurt you tonight." Story 30. That's where the accident happened. My niece pointed at a random spot on the road during our drive. There is no sign, no memorial, just trees. Story 31. We were scheduled to fly the next day, and my 3-year-old relative said, "Plane in the sky go boom," with hand actions. We were all unsettled. The events of September 11th occurred the next day, and our flight was canceled. Story 32. One night, when my son was 3, we stopped on a bridge closed to traffic for the annual fireworks. My son pointed to the middle of the road and began talking about the sad little boy who was waiting for his parents to come and get him. Recently, there had been an accident, and a boy did not survive. Story 33. A child walked up to me in a hospital, stared at me up close, and then said, "Oh, I knew the old you before you died. I was waiting for biopsy results to determine if I had cancer. I didn't have cancer, but for the next 10 minutes I thought my time was up." Story 34. I was a nanny for a 5-year-old who one day started telling me he was going to kill his mom. He calmly described how he was going to throw her in the garbage, and then the truck would come and take her away to be crushed. The child seemed troubled, but his parents brushed it off as normal behavior. I was also their 13th nanny in just a couple of years. Story 35. My nephew recently told me that when people bleed excessively and die, they never clean up after themselves, and that is littering. Story 36. My wife's dog had died the night before, and we buried her. When my nephew came to visit, he asked, "Why won't Daisy come here?" I told him she had gone on vacation, and he replied, but I saw her walk across the hall. Story 37. When my nephew was about 3 or 4, he wandered alone into the hallway at a family gathering one evening. I went to see what he was doing, and he just pointed into the dark and said, "Seeing if the lady is still there." Story 38. It wasn't anything he said, but my little nephew would stand about 3 feet away from where I was sleeping all the time. He remained completely silent. It wasn't sleepwalking. It was just a bit creepy. Thankfully, he grew out of it. Story 39. My son, around 5 years old, your hair isn't as dark as my mother's did before you. And she spoke a different language. I had to leave her before I turned 10, and then you became my mother. I had to stop the car. Story 40. I have taught special education from preschool to high school and provided therapy for all ages for several years. So honestly, nothing scares me anymore. Here are some early experiences that gave me a shiver. 1. A 4-year-old girl was drawing circles with a crayon, her hair covering her face as she hunched over the table. When I tapped her and asked, "Hey, what are you drawing?" she giggled, not normally how she used to. She then started drawing a bigger circle off the paper onto the table, almost breaking the crayon she was pushing so hard. I asked her again, "Child's name, can you please tell me? I really would like to know, and maybe I can get you more paper as we can't draw on the table." She flipped her head up, looked sideways at me, and in a very deep, almost male voice said, "I'm drawing the circle of hell that child's name is trapped in." She then flipped her hair back, continued drawing, and then just stopped, stood up, came over, gave me a hug, and went to play on the slide with other kids. This never happened again. 2. A 6-year-old girl came in presenting symptoms of psychosis, possibly related to trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and schizophrenia. She sat at the play tea time table and had a full, almost adult-level conversation with 3 different people. This behavior is common in psychosis, but what was astonishing was that one of the people she talked to was a pilot from the 9/11 attack. He described how he was honored to fly, loved his wife and kids, and hoped that some of his passengers would survive by using the emergency exit. As far as I or her parents were aware, she had never been told about the attacks or what happened, and she had never been on a plane. Yet, she was able to tell the exact date that the male pilot mentioned. We asked her about 9/11 in a later session, and she had no understanding or memory of that date. 3. A more heartwarming story involves a student's mother who was diagnosed with cancer. She was a single mother of 4, and doctors did not foresee a positive outcome, even with chemotherapy. She prayed daily to Mary and hoped for a miracle. One day, during pickup, her 5-year-old son came out of my classroom and handed her a picture he drew. She smiled and asked, "What is it of?" He giggled and said, "You know, Mommy." She smiled and replied, "No, sweetie, tell me." He said, "It's of you in bed last night when the beautiful lady in blue came and gave you a kiss on your belly, and then the sun got bright and the lady left." We both looked a bit confused but thought it might be a mixture of dreams, television, or just high stress. No lie, the mom went to the doctor later that week and was told she was clear. The doctors claimed it was nothing short of a miracle. To this day, the mom is certain that her son saw Mother Mary in blue visit her in her sleep and cure her. What a sweet and magical thought. If you want to hear more strange things kids say, I could write a book. After a while, I guess it just goes with the territory and doesn't cause such a shock anymore. But I hope these stories helped. Let me know if you need or want more. Thank you. Story 41. My niece once whispered, "Don't worry. The girl under your bed likes you." I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Story 42. A family member was taking care of a friend's child. As she leaned over his car seat to buckle him in, he said in a posh little kid voice, "I'm going to cut your neck." Story 43. Who are the shadows that live in the lane and come out at night? Do you mean you see people's shadows? No. No people. Just their shadows. Story 44. I pointed to a chair at my great-grandmother's house and said, "Gamma's going to die there." I was about 2. She died in the chair a few months later. Story 45. My son was about 3 years old when he asked me to come into his room, lie down on his bed, and close my eyes. I felt suspicious and a little reluctant due to his behavior. He was being overly sweet and reassuring. I lay down and closed my eyes. Then he said, "Now just lie still. This won't hurt a bit." I opened my eyes to see him standing over me with a toy hammer in one hand and a toy saw in the other. I quickly left the room. Story 46. I was working until about 3 in the morning and finally shut my laptop to head to bed. I walked past my 4-year-old's bedroom door and heard something. I turned around and saw little fingers reaching under the bottom of the door, followed by a low whisper, "Hi, Daddy." It wasn't particularly disturbing, but I'm pretty sure it took about 5 years off my life. Story 47. My 3-year-old niece Tabitha was asked by a family friend what she wanted to do when she grew up. She looked the woman straight in the eye and said, "Oh, Fran, I'm not going to grow up. When I am 16, I will prick my finger on a spindle, and I shall die." Story 48. Some answers in this thread explain why, although I don't believe in a traditional afterlife, I think there must be something connecting experiences. My youngest sister sometimes spoke about a past life when she was otherwise completely nonverbal due to autism at ages 3 to 4, and it concerned me. She described a very specific British boy who passed away at the age of 12. Story 49. Not to me, but when my younger brother was 3, he climbed up on our mother's lap and whispered into her ear, "I wish you were dead because then you'd be green, and that's my favorite color." He's special. I just remembered my girlfriend's mother telling me how my girlfriend's entire toddler years were spent narrating everything she was doing. Usually, it was things like, "Now we're tidying up," or "We're going up the stairs." One day, all of a sudden, when her mother was minding her in her bedroom, it changed to "We're playing, and the man is watching us." Apparently, she refused to sleep in there anymore, and they had to swap the bedrooms around. She had violent night terrors every single night. She talked about the man and could point to exactly where he supposedly stood. It was the same place every time, the corner of the bedroom. Eventually, it stopped. My girlfriend has no memory of it at all, and she hasn't had any strange or creepy experiences since, so it was probably just an overactive imagination. She's always been an anxious person, but still, creepy. Story 50. When I was about 4, I started drawing my dad in a coffin and me crying at his grave. This was not a one-time incident, but something I did regularly until I was about 7. I remember drawing those pictures, thinking it was the saddest thing I could imagine. Just to reassure you, I am 32 this month, and my dad is still fine. Story 51. One of my close friends and his wife could not have children, so they adopted a brother and sister who were in an abusive home. The girl was about 7 years old, and during a picnic, she asked if I had a penis and if she could see it. Apparently, her older siblings had been using her inappropriately in exchange for food. She was undergoing intense therapy to help her understand healthy boundaries. For her, sexual encounters were perceived as transactional. Story 52. My first apartment was in an old monastery, and rumor has it that the nuns there would sleep with the monks and have children together. I explored the basement, even though I was not allowed, as I was very curious. I found tiny beds in the basement with the word "boy" painted on the wall in blue paint. My sister and her 2 kids at the time had an apartment just across the enclosed courtyard. I was watching my 5-year-old niece while my sister went to work, and I heard her talking in her room to someone. I peered in to find her talking to someone, while she colored on her plastic little Tykes table, engaged in a whole conversation. I asked her what she was doing, and she stated, "I'm just coloring with my friend. He's a blue color and comes and goes throughout the house." Was my niece really seeing a blue boy, as she would say? I know young children are often more sensitive to things like this and are frequently reported to see ghosts or spirits. What's your opinion on this? Story 53. My wife was a nanny a long time ago. She was putting a 3-year-old down for a nap. He got into his bed and asked, "What's her name?" My wife replied, "Who?" He responded, "The girl in the rocking chair. She looks mad at you." There was no one in the rocking chair. She said, "There's no one in the rocking chair." He continued, "That's because she's standing over there now. We assumed he was using his imagination, but he never mentioned anything like that before or after. Story 54. A 6-year-old looked me in the eyes and said, "I'm 45 years old." Completely out of nowhere. I totally believed him. He was surprisingly observant and aware for his age. Story 55. When my now 23-year-old daughter was about 3 or 4, I awoke to find her standing silently by my bed. She leaned over and whispered, "Mommy, how many spiders could fit under my bed?" Story 56. My mom passed away when I was a teenager. My siblings are significantly older than me, so I have several nieces and nephews. I was babysitting one of them, and while we were sitting at the table coloring, my niece looked at me and said, "I used to be yours and Mommy's mom." Then she continued coloring. Freaked me out. Story 57. A kindergarten teacher shared a story about a little boy who confidently said, "My daddy is picking me up today. But not my old daddy, my new daddy. My old daddy gave me to my new daddy a long time ago. My old daddy had red skin and funny-looking feet, and he doesn't like when I talk about him." Another child said, "My mommy had a baby in her belly, but the baby came out and fell into the fire. The mother had a miscarriage a few weeks before." Story 58. I kept my nephew, who was around 5 years old, for an overnight stay. The night was relatively uneventful. The following morning at breakfast, they were whispering to each other, and the older one finally said, "When you're walking around at night, you need to be quieter. You walk around a lot," and it woke us up. I went to sleep after putting them to bed. Story 59. We moved into a century-old house. My children tell me about once a year about the ghosts that live here. The first time it happened, I saw an older man in the dark hallway. He was wearing a top hat or something similar. I explained to them that houses are expensive, we are financially constrained, and can't move. All of us, including the ghosts, will just have to live in harmony. Now they casually mention recent ghost events. I don't really believe it, but it still feels somewhat creepy. Story 60. I was babysitting a spirited 4-year-old and his 2-year-old sister when I was 16. We were playing with Lego figures. He handed me a character and said, "I'm Penny, you're Georgie." Then he continued, "Hi, Georgie. Do you like balloons?" I asked him, "Do they float?" thinking he wouldn't know the reference. This kid had the most mischievous smile on his face, looked me in the eyes, and with a voice straight out of The Shining, he said, "They all float." This was before the It remake came out. Story 61. My nephew said, "When I'm dead, I won't stay dead for long. I'll be dead for 3 days and then I'll come back." His mother asked, "Really? Will you be able to wake up other dead people?" He replied, "No, you'll all stay dead." His parents are strong atheists and they live in a very secular country, so these ideas are not part of his environment. I guess my nephew is just like Jesus. Story 62. I didn't see you much before I was born. I see you all the time now, calmly stated out of the blue by my 3-year-old nephew. According to family lore, my mother was 5 when she mentioned that she could see through her aunt as she descended the staircase. That aunt died a few days later, apparently of natural causes, but the family felt uneasy about it. Not long after, she expressed the same observation about another older family friend, saying she could see through her to the wall behind because she's much thinner now, like fabric. That person also died within days, and there was always a little distrust of her in the family after that. Story 63. Not me, but my best friend. My 4-year-old sister told her she shouldn't smoke because there was a baby inside her. She found out she was pregnant a few days later. Story 64. When my son was 2, he told me his best friend was John Hancock. I didn't know much about Hancock, so I looked him up online. My toddler walked by, saw a portrait of Hancock on the screen, and said, "That's him." I asked him what he meant, and he replied, "That's my friend, John." Story 65. My mom told me that while we were watching the news coverage of September 11th, I turned to her after the first plane and said, "There's going to be a second one." I was 5, and while I remember watching it on TV, I don't remember saying that. Story 66. We bought a 130-year-old Victorian fixer-upper. I painted the family room a nice, calming blue. It had previously been a shiny olive green. The next morning, my son told me, "The old man and I don't like it. The old man is mad because he liked the green." When I asked which old man, my son replied, "He said this used to be his house," gesturing as though the old man was next to him. A few days later, I painted the guest room a blush color, with the accents a shade deeper. I did this while my kids were sleeping, so they had no idea until they went in there. This time, my son told me the old man thought it was beautiful, and he was glad I was taking care of the house, but he still preferred his green room. Not creepy at all. Story 67. My neighbor's child said to me while they were playing in my yard, "Who's that little boy behind you?" My older brother died when he was 2. Story 68. My ex-father-in-law passed away when our daughter was 4. About a month later, I was in the kitchen doing dishes while my daughter sat on the floor beside me playing. It was midsummer, so it was very warm. Suddenly, I felt cold, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. At that moment, my daughter looked up at me and asked why Grandpa was just standing there. I told her Grandpa was in heaven. She said, "No, he's not, Mommy. He's standing right behind you." Story 69. He didn't say anything because he was nonverbal at that stage. My son looked over my shoulder and laughed as if someone were there making faces at him. It was just the 2 of us in the house at the time, which freaked me out. Story 70. My neighbor told me that his nephew whispered continuously when she asked why the child answered, "I speak with Grandpa." Obviously, the child never met his grandpa because he died 15 years ago. Story 71. When my son was 5 and attended part-time kindergarten, I would walk to the school to pick him up. On the way home, he started talking about his other family. He would tell me about before you, saying my mother would walk me, we had a garden, and there were lots of flowers. He described the color of the house, how it had a fence, and detailed his room, all from before you. It was as if he remembered a past life. Story 72. This leaned toward creepy but was more funny. My 3-year-old said that when she was being born, she saw a skeleton. My nephew, probably 4 at the time, asked everyone to stop talking during dinner once. We did. He looked around the table at all 13 of us and said, "You're all going to die." Silence. He had just learned about death after driving by a cemetery and asking about it, so he was simply informing us about the circle of life. Story 73. It wasn't addressed to me, but I overheard it. I was working at a daycare as a toddler teacher for 2-year-olds, and one of my students said to one of my coworkers, "I see spirits." That was it. It wasn't very creepy, but it was more of a what the heck moment. Story 74. I only have the opposite. The child learned that to sleep with parents, he could express his fears. On the first night, he complained about a Tyrannosaurus Rex in his bed. He had a large plushie that he loved. On the second night, he complained about a glowing rainbow snake. He had Christmas lights in his room and had turned them on. We discussed that he didn't need to justify getting in our bed other than needing cuddles. After that, he stopped inventing monsters. Story 75. My daughter told me that she misses her old mom and dad, the ones before me and her father. She only knew them for a little while but is happy with us as well. Story 76. When Princess Diana died, my daughter was just old enough to be allowed to go downstairs with her little brother, get a glass of milk for both of them, and turn on the TV to watch cartoons while my wife and I struggled to wake up and negotiated whose turn it was to get up and make breakfast for the kids. That morning, the usual television programming was filled with breaking news, so there were no cartoons on the usual channel. She appeared at my bedside silently, at eye level, and when I opened my eyes, she whispered to me, "Daddy, someone has died." I was taken aback. Story 77. I'm not sure, but my 1.5-year-old daughter will walk up and snatch my feet when I'm lying down. I always jump, and she lets out a piercing laugh because she knows I don't like my feet touched. It's not creepy, just a bit sinister, I guess. Story 78. When my daughter was a student teacher, a 5-year-old stared at her intently and said, "Miss, you're going to die in that dress," and then walked off. She hasn't worn the dress since, just in case. Story 79. I was playing house with a friend's 4-year-old, and it took a dark turn when she picked up 2 pencils and said, "Now pretend these are bloody knives, and you just walked in and saw me stabbing someone to death." I had to end that game right then. Story 80. I once told a woman that smoking would kill her very slowly when I was 3 or 4 years old. I know because my parents still like to bring it up over 20 years later. Story 81. Are Granny's eyes being eaten by maggots now? Story 82. My young child said, "This world seems strange. I think you could be a robot." Essentially, she was expressing her belief that she was in a simulation. Story 83. I was in a public restroom washing my hands, and I was the only adult around when a little girl approached me. I guessed her mom was in one of the stalls. "I had a little brother, but he died," she said, lowering her voice to a whisper. "His name was Baby Quentin." Story 84. This started when he was a toddler, and he still does it today. When he wanted me at night, he wouldn't wake me up like a normal child. He would just stand over me, staring at my closed eyes until I felt the weight of his presence and woke up. It scared me every time. A few years later, the same child declared that I was the best mother he ever had. I want that on my tombstone. Story 85. In the middle of the night, my 4-year-old said, "Mommy, you don't have to cry. I'm a child of Satan." We are not religious and don't discuss Satan, so it was a bit of a mystery where she got that from. It turned out that the older sister of my child's classmate, with whom she had a playdate the previous day, had been playing some music with interesting lyrics. Story 86. My 4-year-old niece grabbed my hand after I had cut my finger and said, "I want to see you bleed." Story 87. Our firstborn, who is 4 years old, actually predicted the death of a close family member. Since then, everyone is shaken when they speak. Story 88. When I used to live in the middle of the woods, I was babysitting my siblings and little cousins. We were pretending to have a party in the basement when my cousin suddenly turned pale and told us, "I saw a man walk in front of the window." You know those little windows at the top of the wall in basements where you can only see people's feet and legs? I was the babysitter. I was a teenager but had to take on the role of the responsible adult and go upstairs alone because everyone was too scared to come with me. I had to analyze the dark forest surrounding the house to see if there was really a stranger stalking us. To this day, I have no idea if he was hallucinating or if it was real. Oh, I forgot to mention something very important. It was in the Appalachian Mountains. Story 89. I am going to harm you with a knife to your neck. She was 3 years old. She had already tried to suffocate her grandmother. I often wonder what happened to her. Story 90. When my daughter was a toddler, she would always point at Dominion energy trucks and workers and say, "Huh, aliens." Or, "Look, Mama, it's the aliens." She would only do it to Dominion workers, not any other type of service truck or workers, even ones from other electric companies. Even at night, when they were parked and had their lights off and you could just barely make out the truck, she would still say it. It was super casual, like she was pointing out something totally normal. It wasn't super creepy, but it did have me wondering. Story 91. What would happen if everyone died at the same time? I said that if the whole world died at once, it would be a tragedy, but no one would notice since we would all be gone together. She replied, "No, not everyone. Just all of our family." Story 92. I once babysat a 7-year-old who was a bit different. Although I don't remember much, she definitely stood out. It wasn't a big deal at the time. She loved playing with frogs and lizards. I swear she told me with a straight face that if anything happened to one of her frog friends, her grandmother would make sure I would be sorry. The thing is, her grandmother had been dead for 2 years. I liked that kid. She's 13 now. Story 93. I was 12, and my cousin was 4. He said, "I want to visit the man in the cellar. He plays with me and can remove his head." Spoiler alert. No one lived in the cellar. Story 94. My 4-year-old asked during dinner why we couldn't see time. I said the clock on the microwave showed the time and we could see it fine. She replied, "Yeah, but that's our time, not all time." Story 95. What if our baby sister dies in your stomach and then you have to see her coming out dead? Ma'am, why? Story 96. When I was 15, my neighbor across the street, who I guessed was around 5 years old at the time, crossed my path while I was walking my family's dog one afternoon and said, "You're the girl my daddy has all the photos of." They had moved in a couple of months prior and we knew them, but not well. I was obviously confused and asked, "Are you sure he has photos of me?" She replied something like, "Yes, lots. He keeps them in a book. I've seen it in his room." This creeped me out. I told my mom, and she instructed me never to speak to him and to inform her immediately if he tried to talk to me. Long story short, a year or so later, I caught him prowling around in our backyard while I was home alone. I saw him try to open the glass door to our house, which was thankfully locked. Our dog was the sweetest, chubby boy, but a bully mix. While he was usually a total angel, he went absolutely feral in attack mode and scared him off. We ended up moving several months later. Yes, I did make a police report. I know they went over and talked to him, but it was the usual small-town situation of not being able to do much until they caught him in the act. Back then, security cameras were not easily available, so we decided to leave the neighborhood. I never saw the photos, but occasionally I remember this time in my life and wonder how he was getting so many photos of me. He was creepy. Story 97. A few weeks ago, my 4-year-old sister, in the middle of a completely unrelated conversation, said to me, "Our house is going to burn." Story 98. A 4-year-old with a dark expression said, "You dirty, rotten little brat," because I had some of his cereal. My mom babysat him. Story 99. Babysitting a 7-year-old girl, the only child. She is digging in a crack in the pavement of the driveway. She plucks out a tiny green weed, whips her head around to stare me dead in the eyes and says, "You made the mud. You made the weed. You made the beast." Story 100. A few years ago, my youngest daughter, who was 4 at the time, told me she was sad because I would never be 40. She mentioned it a few months before my 40th birthday. Came out of the blue one day while I was sitting in her room. I told her she couldn't know that and to not worry because I plan on being around much longer. I just turned 42 last week. To be honest, I was anxious for a few months leading up to my 40th birthday. If I experienced heart palpitations or felt unwell, I was convinced, this is it. I've completely relaxed about that now, but I must admit, she made me a bit uneasy. Story 101. I have told this story before on another account years ago, but my daughter was nonverbal from birth until she was 4 years old. She had recently turned 2 about 3 months prior, and she had not been diagnosed with autism yet. I made it a point to avoid cursing in front of her as much as possible. I put her to bed the night before in a purple zip-up sleeper outfit. One morning, I woke up as it was just starting to get light, allowing me to see slightly in my room. I woke up because I could feel eyes watching me. I looked around the room and finally saw her standing right next to me. I immediately exclaimed, "What are you doing?" because I was scared and disoriented. My 2-year-old was standing at the bottom corner of my bed next to me, wearing her dad's second pair of work boots, a pull-up, a white and dark pink tie-dye shirt that looked like blood in that light, a creepy dented Dora mask, and holding a butter knife. She nonchalantly said, "Watching you sleep." It honestly scared me. I jumped out of bed and turned on my light, asked her how she got the butter knife, and got dressed. She took me to the kitchen and showed me how she slid the chair over to get it out of the top cupboard, then slid the chair back. When I asked her why she had the butter knife, she showed me the peanut butter. She wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for breakfast, but couldn't open the cabinet with the child lock. Then she took me into her room and showed me how she opened her drawer to get clothes and the drawer for a pull-up, sliding those shut as well. No one believed me for a few days, and when I explained what happened, she repeated the "watching you sleep" part out loud to my parents. She never said another word again until she turned 4. She also tried to surprise my dad with a mini baseball bat around the age of 4, but that's another story. She has always been quiet, a great kid, and calculating in problem solving. She amazed me at such a young age and often creeped me out. I love that crazy now 16-year-old. Story 102. People want to harm me because I am a beautiful butterfly. This was said by my niece when she was about 3 years old. It was more surprising than disturbing, as it came out of nowhere. Story 103. When I was about 4 years old, I drew a picture of people falling from the sky into the back of a pickup truck. This unusual vision has never returned to me. Story 104. My 2-year-old was suddenly crying in her room about 20 minutes after I put her down. I went in and asked what was wrong, and she pointed to the window and said, "Man, that really freaked me out." I was too scared to actually look out the curtains. Story 105. I am a nanny. I have worked with hundreds of children over many years, caring for newborns up to 16 years of age. One boy, whom I cared for at 4 years old, exhibited behaviors I believe are associated with oppositional defiance disorder. He would refuse anything I asked of him and would run off near traffic, laughing while I panicked. He would hug his baby sister, who was 18 months old, and cover her with his entire body. He never stopped when I told him to, and I often had to physically remove him from her, as I was concerned he was trying to suffocate her. One day, he was in the back seat of my car laughing. I asked him what was funny. Keep in mind, he was only 4 years old. He looked at me and said he was going to dig a grave and put me in it after murdering me. I gave no reaction but silently thanked my lucky stars that he wasn't my son, as I believed he had the potential to become a psychopath. Story 106. I can smell rotting flesh by your front door. Goodbye. That was my son's 9-year-old friend after his mom came to pick him up from my house. He had just spent the previous hour telling us about one night when he saw a statue out of the window at his dad's house. But in the morning he looked and it was gone. Story 107. I asked my stepdaughter how she planned to clean up after herself when she grew up if she didn't learn to do it while she was young. Her straightforward answer was, "I'll make my husband do it." She wasn't kidding. Her mom is a provider who works while her partner takes care of the cleaning and errands. Story 108. I'm the bad bunny. I'm gonna die, mommy. My daughter, age 6, approached me wearing a bunny mask and holding a toy knife. She had been watching a horror video on YouTube that was disguised as an innocent children's video. No more YouTube for her. Story 109. Our daughter used to tell us all about her imaginary older brother and her stories about high school, band, and friends. It was wild. She stopped telling those stories around the age of 4. Story 110. I had my 3-year-old goddaughter with me, and we stopped to visit my brother at his house. I was sitting on the bed, and she was on the floor playing. She started laughing hysterically. I asked her what she was laughing at, and she said, "The man under the bed is making silly faces at me. He's dressed in a funny vacation outfit like the genie." I lifted my feet onto the bed so fast. A bit later, she looked up and said, "No, thank you," and went right back to playing. But there was no one in the direction she was talking about. I asked why she said that, and she told me an old lady wanted to give her cookies. I looked at my brother, who looked like he was about to throw up. He pulled me aside and said that before his family bought and moved into this house, they rented a house down the street in the same neighborhood. An older couple lived in their house previously. The husband was always dressed like he was going on vacation, with a tropical print button-up shirt, shorts, socks, and sandals. The wife would often go outside when the kids got off the bus and offer them cookies as they walked by their house. The day that happened with my goddaughter was in 2004. I hadn't seen my brother from 1991 until 2003, so there was no way my goddaughter or I knew any of this before she said it. I still get chills thinking about it. Story 111. 4-year-old I used to nanny for said, "This is my friend Lucifer," referring to a toy cat. I didn't realize that the cat in Cinderella was named Lucifer, but it definitely caught me off guard. I've also had a child tell me they remember before they were born the last time they died. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.